we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that government is established to secure those rights.
The Article 5 State Legislators Caucus and Path to Reform welcome you to this webinar, Protecting the American Voice, featuring Larry Lessig, Professor of Law and Leadership at Harvard Law School, Neal Schuerer, former Iowa State Senator, Kevin Lundberg, former Colorado State Senator, and Jim Rubens, former State Senator for New Hampshire.
Welcome, everyone, to our third in a series of State Legislators Article 5 Caucus Path to Reform webinar, where we're going to be focusing tonight on protecting the American voice. And this is an important topic for this evening to help state legislators understand the role that they have within our constitutional republic. And we've got just a great panel tonight, a great group of individuals that are going to be sharing with you. And we really want you to embrace the responsibility you have as representing people in your district, being the voice of your constituents, being the voice of the American people. We want to bring together tonight some real good conversation on the constitutional responsibility, authority, and power that state legislatures have in the operation of our national government. So with that, I'm going to shift over to Jim Rubens. And Jim, why don't you take the screen?
Thank you, Neal. I'm going to make 3 points in my 5 minutes. One, a defense of the 10th Amendment and federalism, and I know we all agree on that. Why it's eroding, and what we should do about it. The 10th Amendment, and I'm speaking to the choir here more or less, but the 10th Amendment is put into the Constitution to do several things. One of the things it does, it protects against one-size-fits-all government. Solutions that spread all over the country may work in one place, but not another. The 10th Amendment and federalism allows states to experiment. 50 different experiments can be run to determine what policy approaches to drunk driving or driver's license and any number of things might work in that state. These states are laboratories of democracy, and states can look at one another and replicate successes and avoid failures. States can test these different approaches. It's a means by which federalism and the 10th Amendment, it's a means by which we can live together as the United States of America. So, for example, one state might object to a particular policy approach, and to have that imposed upon the state by the federal government makes it harder for us to live together. So by reserving to the federal government just those powers reserved to it in the Constitution leaves the states, again, more able to live with one another. And this is, I think, one of the things most important to the framers, the founders of our country, the framers of our Constitution, their extremely perceptive knowledge of human behavior and the tendency to, if you concentrate power in any one hand, and we're at the point, as I mentioned before the session began, we are living in a much more complex world than that inhabited perhaps by the founders, the framers. Nonetheless, when you concentrate power in a small number of hands, even hands that are initially very well respected, esteemed, credentialed, you run the risk of that power becoming embedded and becoming tyranny. The framers were deeply, deeply suspicious about concentrating power, and therefore very careful about dividing power and assuring that it did not become concentrated. So these are some of the benefits of federalism, the 10th Amendment. And I know most of us agree on this. Now it's eroding of late for a variety of reasons, but I want to point out one major contributory cause of this erosion of the 10th Amendment rights of states to determine their own affairs. And it's the money system, the political money system that we have in the United States, which has changed dramatically since the framers conceived of our Constitution, since it was formed. And so I'll give you a couple of examples. In New Hampshire, a guy named Mike Bloomberg, who lives in New York City, decided he wanted to change the legislature of the state of New Hampshire. He flooded our state with money, and he flipped in 2018 the control from Republicans and Democrats in both our state house and our state Senate because of his particular concerns about gun rights. He successfully did this by flooding the state, targeting money very, very carefully and specifically to swing legislative districts in our state. We can look at the election that just happened in Georgia. There's something like $200 million of so-called outside money. This is non-candidate money that went into the state of Georgia. And this is my warning about concentration, right? You heard 2018, New Hampshire, one person, Mike Bloomberg. This $200 million that flooded into the state of Georgia was controlled. The contributing sources might be large, but the control, the direction of this $200 million was in the hands of probably a dozen or 24 people, the leadership of the Senate on both parties, and wealthy people, and the residents of these people, the small number of people, a dozen or two who controlled that $200 million that went into Georgia. Those people live typically in places like New York State, New York City, California, and Washington, D.C. So we have this flood of outside money in this new campaign money system we've got, where local preferences on candidates, local issue priorities, the process by which local parties in our various states select and raise up candidates based on their history of doing good things in the states, all that is being subverted by this flood of outside money. And these people, this outside money from these three states and these 10 major metropolitan areas from which most of this money flows, and I'll send you links to this because I've done some research. You can use opensecrets.com and look at, or .org, and look at this yourself. This is eroding federalism. So what should we do about it? I'm on the board of an organization called American Promise. American Promise is focused on one thing: the passage of an amendment to the United States Constitution. Some people call it the 28th Amendment, to restore to the states and to the Congress the power. This is, and I use the word restore because this power existed before roughly 2010, to set limits on campaign money, both contributions and expenditures. And this amendment does not specify what Congress or the states would do with this power, this restored power to set these limits. So, for example, you might have a state like New Hampshire that might set a donor voter law in state so that money to support candidates in the state of New Hampshire would have to come from individuals, not unions, not corporations, who live in the state of New Hampshire. That might be an approach. The state of Montana might go back to what it had, where corporate money was banned. They didn't like Anaconda, the copper company running their state legislature 100 or so years ago. We'd like to restore to the state of Montana the power to do this. So what the states and what Congress might do with this power is yet to be determined. So one of the problems with this amendment, because American Promise is working on this amendment being drafted by Congress and then sent back to the states, the 38 states, for potential and hope for ratification. We hope to have this done by July 4th, 2026. Right now, it's very partisan. The bill in Congress is the last session supported by every Democrat in both the House and Senate, and one Republican. So one of the things that I'm working on, and American Promise is working with me on this, is to link the term limits constitutional amendment, which is also stalled in Congress because it's heavily supported by Republicans and largely unsupported or opposed by Democrats, is to put them together into a grand bargain. So we'd have the term limits amendment and the campaign money amendment, restoring power to the Congress in the states to set limits, combined into one element, and hoping that Republicans and Democrats in Congress will unite and send that language back to the states for potential ratification, either linked together or separated into two questions. So those are, that's what I'm about.
Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate the comments and the hard work that goes on. Professor Lessig, you're up.
Thank you very much. And I'm really honored to be here on this panel and see old friends, especially Jim, who I've worked with in New Hampshire as he's done extraordinary work to raise awareness about the corrupting influence of money across the country, but especially in the States. I just had the honor of arguing a case in the Alaska Supreme Court, which was arguing to the Alaska court that there's no reason the sovereignty of Alaska should be crushed by these federal authorities to say that Alaska can't protect itself against large contributions or outside spending and contributions, so that it has a democracy, a representative democracy that would be, as Madison promised, the American democracy, the Congress would be, quote, dependent on the people alone. And more importantly, dependent on Alaskans alone. And I think that this point that Jim is making is extremely valuable to recognize that this issue that Jim was talking about is not a right-left issue. It's a pro or anti-democracy issue. It's about who controls your democracy. Do your citizens control your democracy? Do all of your citizens control your democracy? Or do a few, whether they're out-of-staters or the very rich like Mike Bloomberg? But Jim approaches this question through Congress. And I have to confess, I'm not an admirer of Congress. In my career as a constitutional law professor, I've had the chance to observe legislatures around the world. And when I hear people say America is the greatest democracy, I say, are you talking about Congress? Because the reality is Congress is an embarrassment. The institution of Congress, the deliberations in Congress, the reflection in Congress is an embarrassment. Any number of legislatures around the world are infinitely better. But I say, are you talking about state legislatures? And then I'm with you, because in this process of trying to build the Article 5 movement, I've had the privilege to watch many state legislatures across the country. And the way they do their work is exactly what Madison was imagining when he was imagining Congress. I had the privilege of testifying in New Hampshire about a ranked choice voting bill. And this was a committee hearing, and there were probably 20 members on the committee. And that committee sat in a committee room for 4 hours. Nobody had a phone out. Nobody had newspapers out. They sat there 4 hours, every one of them, listening to testimony of a wide range of ordinary citizens and experts and everybody about ranked choice voting. And I leaned over to my colleague and I said, could you imagine this happening in the United States Congress? And the answer is no, because they've lost the ideal of democracy tied to the people. And I think that ideal lives in the states if it lives at all in America. And that's why this institution that you have here to rally states to understand their power is so critical. Congress, when the framers of the Constitution, when they were just about finished, George Mason stood up on the floor of the convention and he reflected on the manner by which the Constitution at that moment could be amended. And at that moment, the only way the Constitution could be amended was for Congress to propose an amendment. And George Mason said, well, what if Congress is the problem? And they had a kind of, Simpsons dumb moment. Yeah, obviously, they needed something if Congress is the problem. And so what they created was the Article 5 process for allowing states to call on Congress to convene a convention. And the only power the convention has, don't listen to my friend Robert Reich, who makes up what the Constitution does. The only power the convention has is the power to propose amendments. But it's a critical power because it is independent of Congress. And if Congress becomes the problem, we need a power independent of Congress. So I agree with Jim in identifying the two problems that infect this Congress, the perpetual tenure that members of Congress have, as well as the money that's corrupting Congress. But I am skeptical that they will, on their own, propose the amendment to change those two things. What I'm certain of is that people outside of Congress, reflecting on the failure of that institution, could have the integrity and the courage to propose what needs to happen. And if that happened through a convention, I'm quite confident we could get 3/4 of the states to ratify it. You have an important role, a critical role. In this last election, we saw the consequence of the independence of states. Even when there's political alignment, the independence of states was the integrity of this election process. And we need to continue that in this cycle if we're going to restore something incredibly important about our democracy. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Kevin, Senator Lundberg, I'd like to have you kind of share a bit about and maybe do a little background on the history of the State Legislators Article 5 caucus and the role that it can play in building this national unity among states.
Sure, I'll be glad to jump in on this, and I really appreciate the presentations we've gotten from Professor Lessig and Senator Rubens, who are very passionate on one particular issue, but understand the basic framework. You know, when we started the Article 5 State Legislators Caucus, that was back in 2013, so a few years ago now. And I got involved with it because of my interest in the balanced budget amendment, which was really gaining a lot of traction at that point in time. We've seen some ups and we've seen some downs on that. But what I came to appreciate and realize is some common ground we all have, which is that the states do possess that constitutional authority that needs to be embraced and exercised, because as Professor Lessig pointed out, Congress is not going to go down a lot of roads that may pull a little bit of power and authority away from themselves. It was the safety valve that was put in place in Federalist Paper number 85. Alexander Hamilton wrote very, very specifically that this was, and the way he put it was something on the lines of if there's ever a possibility of the federal government overstepping its bounds, well, we've certainly seen that time and time again now. They provided the cure, what they consider to be the cure, which is to allow the states to initiate the process of amending our Constitution and you know, fixing what was out there that wasn't going right from the federal government side. That's why we started the caucus, is to bring attention to that and to give state legislators a flag to rally around. Now, we've tried to take a bit of a broad approach on giving attention to all of the different issues that are out there, because actually it's not up to the caucus to determine what happens. It's up to the individual legislatures to jump in and call for a convention of what they deem right. And remember this too, of course, that again, I really appreciate what Professor Lessig said, that all a convention can do, and some people call it a constitutional convention, it's not. It's an Article 5 convention to propose amendments, and that's it. They simply propose amendments. They do what Congress has the authority to do by a 2/3 vote in both houses every day they meet. This convention would propose amendments that then go through the very lengthy and difficult process of ratification by, again, all of the states. It takes 2/3 to call the convention. It takes 3/4 to actually approve any amendment that may come from a convention. Our goal with the State Legislators Article 5 Caucus is to encourage legislators and educate legislators on this very important principle of constitutional authority that they have. And it's really not to get a convention put together, and it's not to get an amendment structured. It is to promote the basic fundamental principles of federalism, which are so vital for our compound form of government. It's, you know, it's not just a balance between the branches of government, it's a balance between the levels of government. That was the genius of the founding of this nation, and it served us well for you know, now over 2 centuries, and it can continue if we will embrace all of what that means. And that's why we're doing what we're doing. We send out a newsletter every month to what email address we can obtain for every legislator in the country and other people as well. I'll give this final point, and that is if you're interested in receiving that newsletter, well, first you can just go to the website, which is articlevcaucus.com, articlevcaucus.com for Article 5, of course. And we have all of the past newsletters, at least for the last several months, on the website. A lot of other information that we've been able to collect. And then you can also sign up, and we'll send that newsletter out to you every month that it comes out at the beginning of the month. So I think that pretty much buttons up a description of the caucus and why we exist and what we're trying to accomplish.
Very good, Kevin. I appreciate that. And let's go ahead and have Jim and Larry turn on their cameras, and we'll get into a conversation here and address some of the questions that I've been seeing and things like that. Professor Lessig, would you want to just speak into a little bit about what are those basic rights that states have, states legislatures have in the written constitution that we have and that we're working with? Some of those broad categories we know, proposing amendments, but what are some of the other areas?
Well, of course, the federal constitution, unlike state constitutions, is a constitution in theory of limited powers, meaning if the Constitution doesn't grant the power, the federal government doesn't have it.
Right.
Whereas the states have all the natural powers that a government would have, traditionally called the police powers. Our Constitution, of course, has 3 articles that set out first the Congress, second the executive, and then third the judiciary. And then Article 4 sets out pretty important structures to protect the integrity of the federal, the compound federal republic. And my favorite is Section 4, which guarantees a Republican form of government. And in my own conception of Republican form of government, that's a form of government where it's a representative democracy, which again, as Madison said, would be, quote, dependent on the people alone, by which he said, he meant not the rich more than the poor. That's the kind of republic we should be guaranteeing across the country. But I think what we've seen about the importance of the states in our constitutional system is the integrity of independence. The selection of the president is a very important example of this, completely forgotten by many important members of Congress on January 6th. Because under our Constitution, it's the states that get to set the manner by which the electors are selected. And Congress promised the states that if they have an election and they have a procedure for contesting the results in those elections, and if that contest is finished 6 days before the college votes, and there's not more than one slate of electors presented, Congress promises it will count the votes the states have certified. There's no power under our Constitution and laws for anybody to question what happened in the states. What happened in the states happened in the states. And the electors and their votes as they go to Congress are for Congress to simply, quote unquote, count. And I thought it was an incredible insult to the integrity of the states that anybody would second guess it, or that they thought that they could second guess it. You know, it's like saying, did the Kansas City Chiefs win the Super Bowl last year? Well, you know, when they played the Vikings, there was a bad call, and you know, they probably wouldn't have won against the Vikings if there hadn't been that bad call. So therefore, they shouldn't have been in the Super Bowl. That's just a misunderstanding of the way the system is meant to be established. And we saw the importance of that because it showed the integrity of the states as a check on federal power and on powerful federal actors. And I think there's a lot of people who didn't quite understand the importance of federalism, who after that process were quite convinced of the importance for the stability of the nation to have these independent actors of integrity exercise their role as the leaders in the states.
Okay, well, thank you. That's a great overview. And what would be some of the other things that maybe Jim or Kevin, what you've seen over the years? I know we talk a lot about the 10th Amendment. We talk a lot about those kinds of roles. And just tell me a little bit what you see are some of those particular roles as you served in the legislature.
I'd like to, if I could amplify a point that Professor Lessig made. Having been a state senator and having also beseeched and lobbied the United States Congress to effectuate certain policy objectives. And I can tell you, this is sad and sick. To get a meeting with the United States Senator 10 years ago cost about $5,000. This is the amount of a contribution you'd typically have to make to get an audience. Typically, it might be 30 seconds, maybe 5 minutes in a hallway. If you wanted to bypass the staff, that's how much you had to contribute. Most people cannot do that. They cannot get to Washington. It is very remote to get to Congress. On the other hand, if you're a state senator like myself, I personally returned every single phone call, and people could get to me and they could complain to me at 2 o'clock in the morning. And through that direct access, I learned about issues that I would not have known about. Absolutely would have no contact with the type of people who would bring that issue to my attention. I prime sponsored a victim restitution bill in my state of New Hampshire because a person who lived in a Section 8 housing complex got in touch with me. Okay, that would not be possible in the U.S. Senate, for that person to be in touch with me and for me to learn from that person, to learn about a very serious issue. So I want to defend, what you folks have built here with the caucus, and to raise the importance of the powers of the state to solve problems. States can solve problems more excessively, more rapidly than the federal government can. It's critical that our states retain all these powers that were reserved unto them.
And if I could jump in a little bit here, and actually I'd have a little bit of a comment. Certainly every state is different, and in my experience here in Colorado is I have had access, regardless of whether I was in the legislature with the federal members. But it's true, there are a lot more legislators to the state legislature, and they do live in our neighborhoods, and we have a greater ability to get things done that way, and that's why it was formed there. I know one of the very first issues that concerned me when I got involved in the political arena at all was the fact that the 10th Amendment was there, but it was ignored. And I have been throughout my political career very focused on re-empowering legislators. As a matter of fact, right now, I'm working with legislators in about a half dozen states to run some resolutions in support of the 10th Amendment. Not that I think it's going to change anything immediately, but it's going to make them much more aware of the reality of the constitutional authority that they possess. I don't know how many times I went to the well in the Senate in Colorado and spoke against some edict that was being handed down by either the Supreme Court or Congress or the president or all three of them, and point blank said it's none of their business. It's the business of this body and the people of Colorado, because as Professor Lessig pointed out, the federal Constitution is a very limiting document, and Congress has no more authority than what is essentially in Article 1, Section 8, where it gives the enumerated powers, and everything else. And this is the beauty of the 10th Amendment. It states it explicitly that everything else is in the hands of the people and the states. It's been my lifelong political goal to get legislators to embrace that reality, because I know it will make a huge difference for the liberties of our people. In our introduction that we started this, I was actually on camera there and simply quoted from the Declaration of Independence that stated that governments are here to secure our rights, not to provide everything that we need, but to secure our rights so that we as a free people can determine our destiny as we see best.
Very good, Kevin. I do have a question generally to the panel here. What that was thrown out by Representative Ken Ivory, and that is, what particular protections do states have to push back or to draw that line on the overreach of the national government if a state feels that they've been pushed too hard? What are some of those barriers that can be put up by the states?
Well, I'll start. The Supreme Court has had a troubled history trying to effectively enforce the 10th Amendment. There have been times when it's been quite aggressive, and then it's retreated, and then it's been trying out new techniques, and it's back and forth. And I think that points to a really important fact, which is we can't rely on lawyers and judges to do the work of federalism and democracy. We need people in the states and representatives in the states who insist on the power the Constitution gives them and gets their federal representatives to stand up for the states. The states have enormous power inside of the Senate. Obviously, they don't have as much power as they had before the 17th Amendment, when the state legislatures appointed the senators, but they still have enormous power. And while it might be that you need to pay a fundraising tax to get to them, they typically will listen to the government from a state. And that, I think, in the end is going to be the most important check on the ongoing legislative power. But I can guarantee you that if the states get together and call a convention for the purpose of addressing the representational integrity questions that Jim was talking about, whether it's term limits or money in politics, or fiscal integrity, the balanced budget amendment, Congress will wake up. Indeed, there's an enormous number of amendments in our Constitution, arguably the Bill of Rights, but certainly the 17th Amendment, that is in our Constitution because the states came very close to calling a convention. And they were afraid of the power of the states when they saw them get that close. So I think it's time for the states to stand up, to step up, and to defend principles that are not partisan. The idea of representational integrity is not partisan. There's no theory in the Republican Party or the Democratic Party that should be against equal political power for everybody. That's what our framers fought over. That's what they fought for. And I think it's only the states that have the capacity to force Congress to do the right thing now.
Okay. Thank you.
I would very much agree with that. And I'd add this element that, of course, the Article 5 is the ultimate solution. And if 34 states were to band together to require a convention on any subject, believe me, a new sheriff would be in town in DC. They'd realize that they didn't hold all the keys, if you will. But before that, I believe that states can push back. Here's an example. Congress, I don't know how many years ago, probably 20 years ago, passed the Real ID Act, requiring a certain standard for driver's licenses for states. And a lot of and I think there were some legitimate overall reasons why a state needs to have a very secure driver's license, because it's such an important document for so many reasons. But for the federal government to dictate this to all the states was really outside of their power. And a lot of states just said no. Or here's another example: states. The Congress required a certain blood alcohol limit to be declared driving while intoxicated, and states had different standards. Some states pushed back, or the seatbelt laws. Again, that was a federal standard that was required, and some states push back, and they need to by different ways. I know one state, well, they went ahead and made a seatbelt mandatory while driving, but the penalty was $1. So it was a bit of a soft one, but nonetheless, it was telling Congress, this isn't your business. This is our business. We need to do this.
Great, great. Any other comments, Jim? Do you have anything on that topic?
Yeah, in response to your question, Neal, this has been raised. The power of the federal government to print money and to create currency on an unlimited basis gives them the power to, as has been pointed out, compel the states to act because of this power to print money. And this is one of the reasons I became involved in the Article 5 movement for the fiscal integrity, fiscal responsibility amendment, which we need. I don't think Congress will ever muster the votes to send this question back to the states for potential ratification. I don't think it will happen in any other way other than the states taking the power to, and the fact that the federal government, when and if, let's say when, we get a fiscal responsibility amendment, when the federal government no longer has the power to create money on an unlimited basis and use it as leverage to get the states to do things the states might not otherwise do, that will be a tool to restore states' powers under the Constitution and the 10th Amendment. That balanced budget amendment, that fiscal integrity amendment could be a tool to help us restore in the same way that a campaign money amendment might help the states restore their powers.
Great, thank you very much, Jim. I do have a question here from State Senator Jeff Golden from the state of Oregon. He has a point which I think carries on to what we're talking about here. Seems like different people have very different issues and perspectives that motivate their interest in enhancing state authority and jurisdiction. Does that make the movement for robust federalism bipartisan or just more complicated? Senator Golden from Oregon posed that question.
I'd like to jump in on this one pretty quickly because, yeah, I mean, we see a whole, on this panel, we have different opinions on what we think the priority ought to be. The common ground we have is the states need to seize the ground, but it's so similar to everything we see in legislation. This is the clash of ideas, and it's the appropriate place for it to occur. Yes, it makes it much more complicated, but I'd say let's get in the ring and start to sort this out because the real problem is a federal government that is taken more control than they should. So I'll answer, yes, it does make it more complicated, but I'm up to that.
I mean, democracy is the process we have for dealing with disagreement. That's why we've got it. And if we can find agreement, even though we have different values, that's really important. Like the fact that a conservative and a liberal can agree on the need to end the corrupting influence of money in politics is a good reason to think it's an important thing to do. And it's a check. And I think that diversity is part of our strength.
Very good, very good. And my experience has been, since I've worked on this National Article 5 movement now for since 2016, and really experience I had at the Arizona Planning Convention in September of 2017, even though the issue was to address rules for an Article 5 convention relating to a balanced budget amendment, I saw the value of state legislators coming together, states coming together and addressing national issues. And I believe that's the only way we're going to reconcile our country. And that's why we've gone down this road of path to reform and what we've put together through that effort and trying to make that better. And we just need to find that way to bring those state leaders and the states together to address those national issues that are important to all Americans. So how we do that, I hope through this process with the state legislators, Article 5 caucus, we can get that conversation going. So I appreciate that. Any other comments on that topic?
I find, as I work in many states, the reform, the system reform movement through amending the Constitution has advocates on the right and left, issues that are typically from the right and left. But when you work in the various states, as I have, you find that when groups converge, we find that the desire for system reform unites us much more than the different amendment topics that we might be working on. And we are much, much stronger when we find that unity in restoring the understanding this power exists, the state right under Article 5, the power to amend the Constitution, the power to perhaps through the state-led process, force Congress to take action. So what unites us, I think, is far more powerful, far stronger. System reformers, far more powerful, far stronger than the different policy objectives that we might have. We have a Congress that's stuck in place, that doesn't solve problems, that has supplanted states' rights. This is a set of common problems that has stalled the kind of reforms we need to save our country. So I find a lot of unity when I go into the states among reformers on the right and the left.
Okay, very good, very good. Hey, hang on, I'm just good. I had a question from a state representative from Minnesota that was wondering about, how close are we? Do we have, how close are we to an Article 5 convention? What are some of the groups out there that are working? What are some of the applications that have been applied for? I know I sat in on a testimony in the state of Montana on Friday, where they have a resolution to participate in Article 5 convention in very broad categories. So can we just kind of talk on where the states are with the applications and things like that?
So I don't know the numbers precisely. I think we know that the balanced budget amendment, or versions of that, a call for the balanced budget amendment, is the most progressed. And there's a lot of, and the second most active is the Convention of the States movements for changing the scope of the federal government's power. And then there's a lot of activity around the question that of money in politics and Citizens United. My view is there's a really important strategic point I think we have to think about here. And that is that if we have a call for a convention, or just one call for a convention that is clearly viewed as a partisan call, so a call on the right or a call on the left, that will trigger an enormous allergic reaction by the other political side. And it will defeat the convention. I mean, the convention can meet, it can make its proposals, but if it's identified as a left-wing convention or a right-wing convention, it's just dead. It's dead in the water. I think strategically, we have to think about what is the pair of subjects that we could bring that would give both sides a chance to at least, all we're talking about is proposing ideas, proposing an amendment. Nobody's guaranteed to win. And I think the way, when Jim was talking about fiscal integrity, I think if we talk about fiscal integrity and representational integrity, those two issues resonate in strong ways on both the right and the left. And I think that if we could think about how to move them together, maybe it's not one convention, maybe it's two conventions that are one after the other. But the point is nobody would have a vested interest in taking it down, because they would have an interest in it succeeding. I'm obviously, maybe it's not obvious, I'm a progressive, but there are many people in my corner of the political universe who are wildly opposed to the convention. But one of the reasons they're so opposed to the convention is it's such a great fundraising tool. I mean, every time the right gets another state, there's a letter that comes out, an email that comes out that this is the end of the republic. They're going to take away all your rights. They can change the Constitution without ratification. So like they have a built-in money machine that is depending on framing this convention as a right-wing movement. we can't let that happen. If we cannot govern ourselves sensibly, if we don't have the capacity to express what our Constitution should be as citizens, we've lost our right to be a constitutional democracy. One of my closest friends, when I was trying to persuade him to support the convention, a very prominent Democratic activist, he said, look, why risk it? You know, this was in 2016, he said, when we win in 2016, we'll appoint 3 justices to the Supreme Court. We'll get what we want out of the Supreme Court. And I was astonished that this so-called progressive didn't trust the people to be part of the constitutional process. He wanted the elites to determine the meaning of the Constitution. He wanted a bunch of lawyers appointed by a president to determine the meaning of the Constitution. If that's who we are, we don't deserve a Constitution. And I think the movement that I've seen in the States, and I'm happy to participate with friends on the right and the left in this, demonstrates we do have the integrity of a constitutional process, that we need to rally and take back this before Washington does the damage it seems to be doing.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Professor.
If I might jump in for a second here, because I want to thoroughly agree with what the professor has said there, and also though there's one other particular that needs to be mentioned, and that is that we not only have calls by legislatures for a specific topic, but there are a lot of calls that states have made through the years for a general convention as well. And it's really not been proven as to just how much validity that would have. But, you know, over the centuries, there have been well over 400 resolutions calling for an Article 5 convention. And some of them have been just a general. If you were to bundle those together, you could actually find 34 states that have called for either a general convention or a specific topic like the balanced budget, or one we mentioned a little bit earlier was term limits as well. So it's a bit of an open subject as to just how far along any one of these efforts are. But where I really agree with Larry Lessig is that we need to exercise this authority so as to balance, to give us the true constitutional balance of governmental powers that was envisioned initially and is still very valid need for today. It's either that or it all gets run from the top down. And believe me, I didn't sign up for that. I signed up for a government of the people, not of the folks within the Beltway.
Well, one of the things that our Path to Reform group has recently done, we've kind of linked together with John Cogswell and Campaign Constitution. And in 2018, John did an extensive analysis of the applications that are there. And we have come to the conclusion, working with John over the years, that there's enough applications that if Congress had the political will to call a convention for proposing amendments, they could do that. And that's the tension that we're under right now with the states doing that. So it's on Campaign Constitution's website. I think Marcus put it into the chat area, but just some interesting concepts there. And the same way with our Path to Reform and on our pathtoreform.org website. We're really talking about state leaders coming together and talking about this, because we know well that if the state leaders, a speaker or a president of a Senate, is not in favor of advancing an Article 5 resolution within their chamber, it's not going to go anywhere, even though their members may be behind it. So, you know, trying to figure out what is the best vehicle to bring the states together through their legislatures to address this issue, I think is absolutely critical. Any last words? We're kind of getting up to our end time, and we've had some great conversations. Maybe this might take us a little bit over, but let me just throw this out to the panel. Do you think there is a place in this country and among the states to propose for a general convention for proposing amendments?
Well, so I think that, so in theory, yes. In practicality, no. In theory, yes, because I think any convention should be free to propose whatever it wants. I don't see any reason to restrict it. But I think the fear of this process is real. It's ill-informed, but it's real.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't feed it. We should say, look, we're going to talk about two subjects that there's broad agreement about. And, you know, it's only going to take 13 states to shoot it down. It's going to take one house in 13 states to shoot it down. So
Right.
it's not going to be hard to shoot any idea down. But let's start with something that's clear and has strong support, acknowledging, you know, it might not be that you support it, but you see that there is strong support for this issue. And let's focus it on that issue, on those two issues.
Yeah, I would also add that we need to do it. We need to show the energy and the political will, the political courage to step forward. That, you know, that's why I'm calling on legislatures right now to consider just the merits of the 10th Amendment and the principles of federalism, because that's where it resides. You know, if you get every state legislator to really embrace the authority and the responsibility that they have within their state legislature, that will accomplish the same thing. And I believe the Article 5 convention will be a natural outcome. But you know, you're right. Practically speaking, I don't see it right on the horizon, but I do believe that it can be done if we will take this and run with it, and not just talk, but start to put some action into it. You know, if you're a state legislator and you're looking at your political agenda for this this legislative session, well, make this a priority. I don't know what the circumstance is in your state, but do something to make your colleagues very aware that the 10th Amendment didn't go away, and they need, it's in their best interest to promote it and to exercise it.
It bears repeating to those who have fear-mongered on this power, this Article 5 power of the states, that, as has been stated, it takes only, is it 13 bodies, just 13 of 99 bodies to kill any idea. And the assembled delegates at any convention of the states to propose an amendment or amendments will be well aware of this, and will tailor and tune the language with the understanding that it is so easy to kill. It has to be something with huge, broad, widespread support across the political spectrum for anything to have any chance of passing the necessary 38 states. So I think it bears repeating to those legislators who are wary of this power of the states to recall this, to remember this, that it's very, very difficult to get an amendment through the states. It has to be broadly accepted, carefully tooled, thought through, debated, and widely supported across the spectrum.
Very, very, very good. I don't think we could have wrapped up this this webinar any better in terms of a challenge out there, a call to action for state legislators and for the legislatures of the states.